people buying NFTs,
Oh boy.
Bitcoin.
Oh boy. Hello and welcome to Outside the Box, where we explore what's happening online and why it matters. I'm Kim Horcher.
My name's Ajay Patel, and today we are talking about how internet culture has shaped the world. Sometimes with a laugh, sometimes with a cry, and in very unexpected ways.
Yeah, the internet is internet culture, rather, is kind of its own distinct thing. It's its own culture of viral challenges, activism, memes, which are a way to communicate across the whole internet, and sometimes entire generations.
Agreed.
It's very widespread. I didn't think of it that way until I sat down to work on this episode. So to join us today, we have our friend, Steve Flavin.
Hey everyone, always a pleasure.
So let's talk about memes first and kind of what they are. What are the first memes you remember seeing?
I think you were talking in another episode about how all roads lead to Facebook in terms of this juncture of how we sort of behave online and with social media platforms. That's sort of where I remember first seeing like image memes. The concept of a meme can actually extend beyond just GIFs or still images, though, because you can have like video memes. You can have now with TikTok audio memes, like sharing audio in your different TikToks. And honestly, prior to researching this episode, I didn't really know where the origin of the word meme came from or what the earliest memes actually were. It turns out that the term meme came from the 1970s. The modern interpretation of it is more of like an early 90s, like early internet, kind of on message boards, that kind of a thing. But this is fresh from Wikipedia. The word meme was coined by Richard Dawkins in his 1976 book, The Selfish Game, in an attempt to explain how aspects of culture replicate, mutate, and evolve. So the more you know.
That's a very wide definition. I mean, you could include even like graffiti as that.
Yeah, exactly. It's that's a version of it in the real world, and as we've become accustomed to living our lives online as an extension of ourselves, IRL. It makes sense that we would find ways to, express ourselves in a visual format. It is kind of interesting. I was reflecting on this recently that not all memes are political, but I feel like a lot of like political cartoons, the genesis of that format has sort of found its modern iteration in memes and meme culture, which is kind of an interesting way to look at it.
I think my earliest meme I can remember was maybe high school, and it was just like regular images with text on it.
With that white text with the black
Yes,
outline?
exactly.
Yeah.
And then it became much more of a thing where, okay, now you can create it, right? In whatever messaging app, you can easily put a picture in there. You can put titles on there. So I can see how, that's how we communicate much easier, along with businesses. Businesses that, they're always tweeting these memes or sending out some type of message like that without having to write a whole paragraph. It's just like one image can tell their whole story or whatever they're trying to convey. When did you see that, I guess, evolution from the common person using it to more of like entities, businesses using memes?
Yeah, well, memes and also like hashtags, which is interesting, where I feel like that's become kind of a cyclical, like, don't quote me on this, but I feel like hashtags are kind of like phasing out. Like they're still a thing and you still use them for SEO, but I also feel like... you don't see, and I work in marketing, right? You don't see the same type of hashtag campaigns that you might have seen like 10 or 15 years ago. I also, anecdotally, I'm friends with content creators, and there's this, Kim, I'm curious if you have heard similar things. It's kind of uncool to use too many hashtags.
Yeah.
It just looks kind of like visually cluttered.
You got to keep it tidy.
I'm curious what your POV is on it.
That's right. If you use too many, one, I think right now the algorithm, as a concept doesn't favor it. And two, it's messy. You have to consider the visual language you're putting out there.
Mm-hmm.
But back to your original question, AJ, in terms of memes being co-opted by, I guess, marketing or the corporate world, it's hard to say when I first became aware of it, maybe kind of in the, late 2010s, where social media started to take off as a concept, like as a marketing concept. I think a lot of savvy businesses started jumping on it when it started to be cool. And then once that happened, it's almost like catch-22 where it like isn't cool anymore. Because
I know where it started.
It's like,
remember the Denny's Tumblr? Denny's kind of took on the persona of, let's say, a late teens girl and sort of a mean girl at that, and was saying kind of surprising things. So people would see it on Tumblr and be like, whoa, can you believe Denny's said that? And then it sort of started this chain of different social media accounts and their managers being like, all right, I am giving personification to this brand. So like the Steakums Twitter, Duolingo has and is still doing this very well, where they're kind of giving their brand a persona, like the chaotic owl with Duolingo.
Interesting that you should bring up Denny's, because when I think of like a brand embodying a certain kind of like sarcastic, snarky internet persona, I think of Wendy's, but maybe that was after Denny's.
They do. They still do, baby.
Yeah. I will say it is harder now to go viral than it was like 10 or 15 years ago. From my standpoint, because I'm a content creator and video producer, a lot of that happened at this juncture where a lot of these social platforms started creating their own video features where you upload native video to those applications instead of embedding like a YouTube video, for instance. A lot of the early viral videos that I remember, from when YouTube, was kind of becoming a force in pop culture, like Charlie Bit My Finger, right? Or Chocolate Rain, or, the Rickroll even, is something that transcended YouTube and kind of, became something that people would reference on like TV and,
It's a faster, lower effort political cartoon.
Agreed.
But let's get into, speaking of politics, let's get into movements that started online. Hashtags became kind of a protest tool. We have hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Me Too. Those are very big ones that kind of blew up online with online activism. Or some people call it slacktivism, but your results may vary. There
was this kind of critical backlash that I remember happening during the Black Lives Matter movement in particular, where Kim, you mentioned slacktivism, where it's a very minimal, like low effort. It feels like you're contributing or you're helping a cause, or it's like you're showing solidarity with this movement, but you're not really doing much other than just like adding a hashtag or
unless you're sharing like a true story related to it or donating some money, I would agree with that.
So have you, I guess, Steve, for a question for you is this something that you have noticed in your experience where the internet has almost helped you make a decision or influenced you to support a different cause?
It's tricky to answer because I feel like it's very nuanced and, is sort of on a case-by-case basis, right? I do think that there's this thing that happens online where you get into a conversation or an argument with somebody, like to be charitable. And I feel like everyone wants to win the argument.
Kind of what Steve's saying is like, the party's also online, right? The meme I like to think of as the party, but at the same time, there's also undertone of like people getting in arguments, people not backing down from arguments because it doesn't matter, right? We're not having a conversation like this. You say, oh, this person is this, and then I can go and research a bunch of stuff and formulate this whole thing, and it may just be how I interpreted something. So then it just becomes this, combative space.
Well, I think a lot of times algorithms will prioritize information that is more likely to evoke an emotional response. And so often that emotion is anger.
One thing that I also really like about kind of the virality of things is it's a lot of information also. So sometimes a good way, sometimes it leads you to make a decision that's not so great, right? 2020, like we were talking about, a lot of GameStop memes,
a lot of super stonks,
a lot of people buying NFTs.
Oh boy.
Bitcoin.
Oh boy.
So then it gives you this visibility into something that I may not have thought of before, but at the same time, right? Like there can be a downside to just hopping into something blindly because everyone else is doing it.
There's plenty of ways to lose your money.
So I guess, Steve, how many NFTs do you currently own?
Oh no. How many Bored Apes?
0 NFTs. I know that was a fascinating thing that happened where people were, like with the Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? Is like people were hopping on it because I guess it was cool. I don't know. It always seemed really dumb to me.
Let's switch gears a little bit right now and talk about legacy and internet subcultures. We have these different places. They were hubs. There were places you would maybe visit every day, and now you don't so much anymore. Or maybe you do. Maybe you love 4chan. Maybe you love Tumblr. Maybe you found a way to access Vine somehow. How quickly has internet subculture grown into powerful cultural hubs?
I'm going to answer your question with a question. How much experience do either of you have with Reddit?
I am on Reddit often, actually. I don't post, but I do look.
And it's more of the voice of the people in Reddit, right? That's kind of what I get an understanding of.
Yeah, I think Reddit is the only place online where I go out of my way to read the comments.
Okay.
Because the comments are often helpful. If you want to make the internet work better when you're searching, just write what you're searching for and then Reddit, and it will work.
Steve, a question for you. As I mentioned, the topic of like authenticity and trust. As this internet culture has evolved, do you feel like the trust has diminished or only grown?
There is something to be said about, internet humor in particular, kind of making information, let's say, more accessible and digestible in a way that maybe makes it appear more trustworthy. I think humor is the great equalizer. It's something that, it makes things go down easier. And I think that sometimes it's a slippery slope where it requires a little bit more, more of a critical eye, if you will, to, really think about what is this actually saying and what's the agenda behind it.
Well, there's a few abandoned amusement parks of the internet, if you will, a few defunct websites that do have a legacy, a la Vine before TikTok.
R.I.P. Vine.
So that was, I believe, they had to be short videos, like 6 seconds.
Right.
And then maybe it expanded after. It's wild that I don't know this, and I knew this 5 years ago.
Yeah. I think like you said, right, Vine became this place to be, this hub.
It was funny. It was relatable.
And then it became like, other platforms started copying it, and then we saw the evolution
expanding
change.
it, pushing it out further from what it was to a different concept, to a separate but related concept. Do you have a favorite Vine? Do you remember it?
I was a big fan of the smack cams.
What's smack cam?
Yeah. Steve, do you remember this?
Smack cams. That sounds. I love the cadence of
it
that.
It was a guy. The first second would be smack cam, and then the next 2 seconds would be him literally smacking one of his friends, and then the last 3 seconds, because it was 6 seconds, would be the reaction, and it was that fast where you're just entertained, and that's what I remember the most from it.
AJ,
I'm
that
surprised that you
sucks.
both don't know it. Yeah, that's
don't
what I
like
remember
it.
from Vine.
I don't like it. I liked, there was this lady near Del Taco, and she was laughing uncontrollably and looking at the sign at Del Taco. It had like one of those marquee signs where you can slide the letters in, and it said fresh avocado, but it was slid in a way where she said, "Come on down to Del Taco. We got free shavacado." It's so stupid. That's why I liked it.
Steve, why do you feel like platforms like this, Vine was such a big deal. How do you feel like they end up getting sunset after a certain amount of time?
That
was a very specific instance where it just wasn't profitable. Yeah. And it was because Vine, I believe, was it was a startup, and then it was purchased by Twitter. And then Twitter shut it down very shortly after. I don't know what the exact time frame was, but I remember being shocked, but also not that surprised, because they're finding this on TikTok and like other short form platforms nowadays as well, where it's really hard to monetize short form content. So all of them are increasing the allowable length because that's just how the economy works, I guess.
Money over everything. That's my takeaway.
So Steve, I do have one more question for you. Is looking at the internet culture right now, what do you feel like is either the next thing to come or the next thing to go?
I mean, I'd be foolish if I tried to make any kind of prediction. I would say I'm fascinated by this polarization in video in particular, where And it makes sense if you zoom out and kind of look at the industry, of digital content. But this kind of fork in the road with short form video content and long form, I feel like, and Kim, you and I have talked about this before, and this podcast is an example. Long form content on YouTube is still a thing, and it's getting longer. We're incentivized to create longer videos, and that seems to be both tapping into the monetization aspect, but also just a very particular use case in which people are consuming the content on their TVs, or maybe they're not necessarily watching video podcasts all the way through, but they're listening to them in the background, or they have a picture-in-picture as they're doing work. But you look at platforms like TikTok, for instance, which currently, as we're recording this episode, is at risk of getting banned in the US. May or may not happen. If it disappeared, that would be kind of a changing of the guard on the same level as like Vine disappearing, in the creator community. There's kind of suddenly this hole. What's interesting about TikTok is that it has a global user base. And so, ostensibly people would be using it outside of the US. So it wouldn't disappear completely. But that would be really interesting it's such a cultural touchstone right now. There are a lot of things, music in particular, that like music charts are very influenced by TikTok. And, if that were to suddenly disappear, whether other platforms would pick up the slack or whether something new would emerge to take its place, unclear. But that's the best I can do in terms of a prediction.
On that note, Steve, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I guess we'll just see what happens with the internet next.
I guess we'll see. Always a pleasure. See you guys.
For our audience, let us know in the comments, what was your first meme you remember, or your favorite meme?
Subscribe to the channel and be sure to download Firefox because it's the best. We'll see you next time.